Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Monica Nascimento, and I'm the VP of Marketing at Axiad IDS. This webinar is part of our Who is Privileged Really webinar series, and we created this series to help awaken enterprises to perhaps the biggest blind spot in data breach prevention. Privilege access is changing dramatically. The fact is that many regular workers, from HR business partners, social media managers, call center agents, and even shipping specialists, all have access to highly sensitive or privileged information. And this webinar was developed to help you think about privileged users differently. As I mentioned, we've designed a two-part webinar series to help you navigate your cybersecurity risk and provide tips to enhance your organization's data breach prevention. Today's webinar is part one, where you will learn how to identify who or what could be putting your organization's security at risk. We'll help you define your circle of trust and properly assess risk before determining privilege levels. And we'll help you understand why you need to look at confidentiality, integrity, and availability to enable secure digital interactions within and beyond your enterprise. In order to have a full experience of this Who is Privileged series, we encourage you to join us for part two, where we'll share a demo that shows how easy it is to onboard privileged and non-privileged users via a single user portal. I want to provide a little bit of color on our company's background. The creators of Axiad IDS previously co-founded Active Identity and got very involved in the deployment of multiple authentication projects for enterprise markets, banks, as well as U.S. government programs. And during those deployments, our founders learned the benefits of the technologies and methodologies in these authentication projects, but they also experienced firsthand the pain and complexity of the technologies involved. And the takeaway from their experience was there had got to be a better way to address these problems, customer problems, than a disjointed patchwork of complex technologies. And this is what triggered the creation of Axiad IDS. We were founded with a clear objective to address this complexity. So our focus is to offer trusted identity solutions that allow our customers to fully leverage the digital world we all live in by not having to choose between security, ease of use, and ease of management. So there's nothing new or controversial in this slide, but I'm going to speak a little bit to put the problem in context. Regarding username and passwords, we all know that username and passwords are not secure and easily breached. And there's lots of examples in the press of high visibility breaches with one common denominator, and that's a compromised credential. We all know, and there's a lot of talk about the huge skill shortage of experts. One of the reasons there is such an interest and move to cloud-based solutions is organizations realize they don't have the skill sets needed and the costs are killing them. We also see evidence that when organizations have not properly assessed their risks, they are going to misdiagnose the situation. Another point is that user authentication is not enough. The trust you need to interact online means that interactions and communications also have to be secure. I'm going to elaborate on this a bit. When we say confidentiality, we specifically mean the risk caused by unauthorized disclosure of information. And when we say data integrity, we mean the risk of unauthorized modification of information. And when we talk about secure interactions, we're talking about the risk when organizations can't securely interact with each other, either inside or outside their enterprise. And audit and forensics, this is the ability to record sessions for audit purposes. We all know that the methods of attack are also constantly evolving, therefore security strategies must also evolve. And finally, when organizations attempt to solve their confidentiality or data integrity and audit issues with different solutions, you start to see a patchwork of disconnected solutions, which creates gaps, it's costly, and it actually reduces security. So organizations have been trying to move beyond passwords, but many have attempted to replace passwords with a one-size-fits-all approach. And the one-size-that-fits-all approach simply does not work for many reasons. One is when you treat the entire population the same, you create painful and overly complex systems. And this naturally causes user resistance and workarounds. And eventually what happened was each department has deployed their own solution. And this is how, when we talk about turning into a patchwork of disconnected solutions, this is how this usually comes about. And they're costly, there's gaps, and like I mentioned in the past slide, they don't work to actually improve security. So one of the things we recommend is you start by identifying who is doing what. It's a mistake to choose your technologies or your products or your methodologies before you helicopter out and consider everybody and everything that's interacting with your enterprise. So there's that obvious part of an enterprise is your workforce, the employees and the contractors within your organization. But vendors and suppliers also interact with your enterprise, and customers also interact with your enterprise. And there are non-person entities like applications and servers and machines and devices all assessing your corporate resources. So the first step is to helicopter completely out for a clear view of what we call the circle of trust. And these are the person and non-person entities that truly are interacting with your enterprise and need to be trusted. So you need to start here. So now that you've helicoptered out, and you understand the participants that need to be trusted, you can start mapping use cases. You need to think through what the participants in your enterprise are actually doing. This will be critical to help you truly assess your risk. I'll go over a few examples of this in a few minutes. So earlier we talked about the need to recognize that it's not only user authentication to protect access. You need to think about confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So think through the risks around confidentiality. So what happens when at your enterprise when the wrong person gets information they weren't supposed to? Or the integrity of an interaction. What happens when somebody unauthorized modifies information and you make business decisions or some sort of transaction with bad data? What happens about what about the risks associated to the disruption of access? So you need to map your use cases to the level of risk to determine the range of risks for your enterprise. This is critical to determining proper privilege level. This is usually where our enterprise customers begin to understand that it's not just the IT administrator who is a privileged user. So now that you've helicoptered out to understand your circle of trust, to include everybody and everything interacting with your enterprise, and you've thought beyond authentication on the needs around confidentiality, data integrity, and availability, and you did a proper assessment around your risk aligned to the use cases in your organization, now you are ready to assign appropriate privilege level. But you need to make sure that you don't forget about the dynamic environment of an enterprise and the need for flexibility in the solution that you put forward. Roles change, people leave, you need flexibility. The reality is you do have more privileged users than you realize, and risk-appropriate identity assurance is needed for everyone and everything. So here I'm going to get into a few examples of use cases to help you properly categorize your personas or your participants in your organization. And you might be surprised by some of the examples in the privileged personas column. So let's start by talking about functions that have access to sensitive data. We could start with the HR function. In the past, they had all their files and cabinets, and now it's all online and it's very sensitive data. It's not just a matter of proper authentication to that data, but where that data resides, the data at rest, that matters too. So that's why they're in the privileged area here. Another example that might be surprising to you are helpdesk operators. But if you think about it, in order for those operators to help a customer, they have to have access to that customer's information. So they have customer data, perhaps addresses, previous orders, perhaps information on payment. The risk to the organization when that function is breached is catastrophic. Therefore, they should be considered a privileged user. Think about the engineering department and the IP being developed. What if a competitor got a hold of that data? And finally, an example on collaboration on sensitive projects. We have customers in the pharma industry that need to have secure communications inside and outside their organization when they're working on a formula. Think about clinical trials and the conversations they need to have with the FDA and other companies that are providing an ingredient for the medication they're making. Imagine if the risk, if those collaborations were not secure. So, summary slide here. Before you determine privilege levels, start by understanding, helicopter out and looking at the circle of trust to include everybody and everything interacting with your enterprise. Think about the integrity of data, the confidentiality, and the need for availability. Think about the risks before assigning privilege level of the uses that are happening within your enterprise. Make sure that you're considering the fact that organizations are dynamic environments and the need for flexibility. And the reality is organizations have more privileged users than realize. So think about how you can provide risk-appropriate identity assurance for everyone and everything. So determining appropriate privilege levels in order to enable risk-appropriate identity assurance is key to preventing breach across your entire enterprise. And this is a shared and should be a shared priority, not just a responsibility of the IT department. There are mandates and compliance requirements across multiple functions, and the entire enterprise needs to be mindful of the user experience to help facilitate adoption of these identity assurance solutions so people don't do workarounds. So our mission is to align with our customer security goals, understand their security goals, and help the organization have the trust and the freedom and the confidence to access information anytime and from anywhere. So a few key takeaways: by helicoptering out and understanding your circle of trust, then assessing your risk, you will see that you have more users with privilege than you realize. The second takeaway is that strong authentication has to be frictionless for both the user and the administrator deploying and managing the solution. And the third is that a flexible multi-factor authentication solution that flexes to the dynamic nature of your enterprise is needed. And it's faster to deploy and reduces overall costs. We hope that you'll join the other half of this webinar series to see a flexible MFA solution in action. So thank you very much for your time today, and check our website under the news section in the events tab. You'll see that we have a full series of webinars on different topics. Join us.